For sure, growing up in Arkansas in the 70s was a very, racist environment, right? And we looked like we were the only Asian family in this whole town. So,
Wow.
let's say, like, as a Chinese kid, I didn't understand. I would walk to school and, like, people would throw rocks at us. Or, like, the most jarring story was the brick. Like, we had a brick thrown through our window, and it was 70s Arkansas, right?
Wow.
And so I was a young child, didn't really understand why that was happening. And it was really only happening because of the way we looked,
Yeah.
right? I think I carried that with me for a long time because I didn't understand, but my parents understood. And I think made a very subconscious decision, begin to treat us like Americans.
Why, hello there, food lovers, and welcome to The Hungry Immigrant. I'm your host, Abang Brian, a chef, food researcher, reality TV star, and a guy who believes that every dish tells a story. This is where we uncover the stories behind the flavors, the people shaping our culinary world, and the dishes that bring us all together. From hidden street stalls to Michelin-starred kitchens, we dive into tastes, traditions, and untold stories of food across borders. So grab a seat, bring your appetite, and let's feast on culture, one bite at a time. Today on The Hungry Immigrant, we'll sit down with someone I've been wanting to chat with for a very long time. Chef Tim Ma, a celebrated chef, restaurateur, and entrepreneur. Chef Tim has made a name for himself in the culinary world, blending his Chinese-American heritage with an impressive professional journey. From earning an engineering degree at Johns Hopkins to training with Momofuku, launching multiple acclaimed restaurants and receiving the Michelin Bib Gourmand Award, Chef Tim's story is one of resilience, reinvention, and cultural pride. In this episode, we dive into his family's immigrant journey, the legacy of their restaurant business, now recognized by the Smithsonian, and the deep impact food has had on his identity. We also tackle big topics like the evolving perception of Chinese cuisine in America, the struggles of being an Asian American chef, and the power of representation. So get ready for an honest, inspiring conversation with Chef Tim Ma. Grab your chopsticks and let's dig in. I'm sitting down with a chef that I've always wanted to sit down with ever since I moved to America. He's been so busy. This guy has rescheduled since 6 months ago, and then 2 months ago, and then 1 week ago. But I'm so glad to be welcoming on Hungry Immigrant Chef Tim Ma.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for making the time. I know you're a very busy man. Very, very busy man because...
Sorry for all the reschedules.
No, like only a chef will understand,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, you know what? Like our show is to really highlight what we stand for, right? And besides our culture, we stand for our restaurants. And I think that is very important to you and his 3 children.
Yeah.
Which he's grasping with. And we understand that. But yeah, so I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
He has so many accolades under his belt. He's like me, a nerdy person. Johns Hopkins has 2 degrees, I believe, engineering. And then he had a stint with Momofuku as well. He did a first restaurant in Maple Avenue in Vienna. And then I love all the restaurants he has because it's got like really, really interesting name, Chasing the Submarine, On Any Day Now. And then you had one, I can't pronounce the name, Kirisan, yeah.
That was my it's open and closed, but back in the day, yeah.
Right, and that's the one that got him the Michelin Bib Gourmand Award.
Yes, yeah.
So very, very excited to be here with you. And how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. A little bit busy this week, but this is great. Yeah, I'm glad we were able to find the time.
For people who don't know Chef Tim Ma, because we're talking to people from Asia, like people in America knows nothing about me, which is why I always introduce myself over and over again. Yeah. So like, who is Chef Tim Ma? How did he grow up?
I was born here in America. My parents are from China, Taiwan, immigrated here in the 70s. I was born in Arkansas, which is like a strong part of me and my sister's narrative. Moved to New York just for a little bit. And then I've been in Virginia and the DC area for the past 37 years. Originally, yes, my parents owned a restaurant, worked their asses off so that like me and my sister could go to college and a good university. My sister went to UVA, I went to Georgia Tech and Johns Hopkins to become an engineer. So that sometimes Asian immigrant story where the parents...
it is the classic.
Yeah. They come here to work so hard so that the kids like have a different life than they do. So, all of my parents' generation all owned a restaurant. So my uncle owned a restaurant, my other uncle owned a restaurant, my parents owned a restaurant. And so I went off and became an engineer. In fact, actually, my entire generation, like all my cousins, most of them are lawyers or my sister
Doctors
is
or
an executive.
Yeah.
We don't have a doctor in the family. And then engineers. I did that for a very long time. Not a long time, like 8 years, close to a decade. Did very well in that industry. And then when I was 30 years old, I transitioned into cooking, but it was a non-traditional path in terms of I wanted to become a restaurateur. I didn't want to become a chef. But the story goes is my parents opened a restaurant in Arkansas. None of them, nobody in my family really was a commercial cook. Opened a restaurant, did very well. They had a chef from China. That chef saw that my parents were doing well, opened a Chinese restaurant directly across the street from them in Arkansas. And it wasn't like the days of like today where there's a Chinese restaurant on every block. This was very rare. Yeah. Decimated my my parents' restaurant.
Yeah.
My dad, as hard as he could tried to be the chef, but couldn't, because commercial cooking and home cooking are two different things.
Yeah.
So when I set out to be a restaurateur, I made the choice to go to culinary school so that if that happened to me, at least I had some of the culinary chops to be able to step into the kitchen.
Yeah.
What ended up happening is that I fell in love with cooking. I fell in love with professional cooking. I don't cook at home, but I fell in love with professional cooking and was the chef of my restaurants for maybe like 7-8 years. And then I have since transitioned into the kind of restaurateur role that I originally set out to do.
So for people who don't come from the F&B world, what's the difference between being a chef and being a restaurateur?
The consistency, the preciseness, and the repetition of professional cooking is not the same as home cooking, right? Everybody has their grandma's recipe where it's a little this, a little of that.
Yeah.
In professional cooking, it's much more stringent and like everything's grammed out, right? It's 25 grams of this, 450 grams of this, and then you follow that, and you do that every day, and you repeat yourself until you get really, really good at that one thing, and then you move on to the next thing. You know, I think that's my biggest challenge at cooking at home is that I just don't have the tools that I'm so used to, or the firepower. It's much stronger in a commercial kitchen. So I'm like yelling at my kids, being like, I can't cook in these conditions.
Like, I think a lot of chefs and people who really like to cook, we suffer from that, especially when we cook professionally and then we cook at home. And then like, I used to have my sister around, and I also only progressed into cooking the same like you. I grew up and I was in finance. I was an auditor. All our family members are either doctors, lawyers, or even my sister read law, and we're supposed to be professionals. I did that for a good 5 years as well, and then fell in love with food. And my story is because of my father, who I cooked for when he was ill. He had cancer. That was my journey. Once I started training in a professional kitchen, I got hooked to that addiction for precision. I think you started being a very angry person, and then like I think what helped was when my father passed, my sister moved to America before I did. I was left with my mom. No way can I scream at my mom. I did. I do. But like, I was like, okay, this is not healthy and it is not going anywhere. So like, I kind of started emulating a little bit of the aunties. And cooking at home. And so if you don't cook at home, who cooks at home? What do you guys eat?
Their mother either cooks for them or, I will say that like Blue Apron and
Chef in a Box.
Essentially those like kind of like meal kits that you like, they get you like 80% of the way there and then you finish. I greatly enjoy those.
Oh wow, this is so interesting.
I like when they when I don't have to do as much thinking at home, and like my kids make fun of me a lot when I get home because I completely like just like shut down and become like a very just like almost like non-functional person. So I have to read the instructions, and it's actually quite funny. They're like, you're a professional chef, bro? Like I don't think so.
Right. For me, it's the knives. And like sometimes in professional settings, certain chefs are very particular about using different knives for different purpose. But in my kitchen, when I'm alone or at home, I'm like, give me whatever you have, and I'll deal with that. Right. I think that contradiction of who we are in a professional kitchen or in our careers and at home is something that I've always had throughout my whole life. Even as in finance, I used to be good at people's finances. But
Yeah.
my own finances is
Yeah.
like,
It's very typical. Yeah.
But yeah, let's go back to your family history because the role of your family has even been recognized by the Smithsonian, right?
The American History Museum, yes.
Has an exhibit on Asian food in America, and your family restaurant legacy is actually captured there.
Yeah, it was a pretty cool story. The Smithsonian, again, like in America, is an institution that just archives as much history as possible. You know, one of the luxuries of being in Washington D.C. and having restaurants in D.C. Is that the curators were just eating at my restaurant. Again, like in my family's culture, as the elders start getting older, they start bequeathing all their belongings and all their important things down to their children. Well, so the Christmas before I opened Kirasan, which was the first restaurant that I opened in Washington, D.C., my uncle pulled me aside and was like, for your Christmas, I'm going to give you this huge, like, beautiful panel that he got. I don't know. It was either Singapore or Shanghai or something like that.
Right.
That he imported and he hung in his restaurant. So he was like, I want you to have this and do what you want with it. So I chose to hang it in my restaurant, my very first DC restaurant. And so when I first opened, the curators came to the restaurant and noticed it, and they were asking if, like, what's the history behind it? And I had no idea who they were. I was like, you know, my uncle and his restaurant that was super popular. At the time, they were redoing the food exhibit at the American History Museum, and they were the whole theme of it was food, family, and culture. And so like that exact story fit exactly what they were trying to do. Over the next 3 or 4 years, we did interviews. We had dinners with the curators. They were going deep into the history of my family's restaurant, how family food influenced in this way Chinese food in America, which was super interesting. So yeah, now we have an exhibit that we share with Goya, if you're familiar with Goya. So the Goya family and our family share an exhibit in the American History Museum. It contains a lot of our family restaurant heirlooms.
So for someone who is not able to go to the Smithsonian to experience your family's legacy, how was it growing up in this kind of family that run food businesses? What were your fondest and worst memories of it?
I think it's really to pull it back into like the immigrant story really shaped a lot of I guess who I am today. So for sure, growing up in Arkansas in the 70s was a very racist environment, right? So and we looked like we were the only Asian family in this whole town. So when my parents became U.S. citizens, it was like front page of the paper type of news. Unfortunately, that also brings negative attention. So let's say, like, as a Chinese kid, I didn't understand. I would walk to school and like people would throw rocks at us, or like, you know, the most jarring story was the brick. Like, we had a brick thrown through our window, and it was 70s Arkansas, right? And so I was a young child, didn't really understand why that was happening, and it was really only happening because of the way we looked, right? I think I carried that with me for a long time because I didn't understand, but my parents understood, and I think made a very subconscious decision, begin to treat us like Americans, spoke English to us only. We, you know, for the most part, ate a lot of American food. We engulfed ourselves in American culture, so that, like, if we didn't have an accent, or like, you know, we ate hot dogs and pizza, that they would get over the way that we look. That's not true. I think there's still parts of America that will have some bias against you based on the way you speak or the way you present yourself in America. My cousins and my sister, we don't have accents. We know American culture very well because we grew up that way. We are very disconnected from the culture that is us, the Chinese culture. It shaped us a lot. The opposite when we moved to New York, and I was seeing something where my uncle opened this Chinese restaurant, cooking the food that we ate at home for the Westchester County, New York, if you can imagine that in New York, which is like a very affluent county in New York, in the suburbs of New York City. But his restaurant was extremely popular, so all of a sudden they were being celebrated. Whereas I came from Arkansas, where we were being, you know, rocks were being thrown at us, My uncle's receiving, New York Times reviews and all these things. So it really, like, I don't know, for sure shaped who I am, and how my path has taken like all these different twists and turns. But for sure, it's growing up in America, being in the food industry, living my parents' American dream to living now my American dream, has been a journey.
Leading up to that is these two questions. Number one is, I truly believe your story, stories like this that I've heard all the time, and America now, in most parts of America, that embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, is something that is what I came to America for.
Yeah.
Right. But in these times, without going into politics too much, where there is a track on DEI, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're living it real time right now too, right? I've lived it a little bit of like the, what happens if we don't have equity and inclusion and diversity, right? So we actually have a nonprofit called Chef Stopping AAPI Hate from the anti-Asian hate that happened during the last administration, right? And we're in that period again. And I think a lot of what's happening now will define what the next decade is, right? It feels like we came a long way, and now it looks like we're going backwards. But like, that's the nature of these things, right? We're gonna have a lot of, one step forward, two steps back type of thing. It's the persistence that's important right now.
Right. And so for your children, are they mixed culture?
Yeah. My children are half me, Chinese American, and then half El Salvadorian. So Latin America. Yeah. So they're the most unique kids out there. For example, last night we had for dinner was pupusas with kimchi and gordito, which is like the pickled veg that goes with the, their salsa, like roja, which is like the red salsa, and then Korean beef.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's like a typical meal for them. Like, they very worldly eaters.
Yeah. But like for them, how would you equip them for the scenario that we're facing now?
Yeah, it's interesting to see how they grew up versus how I grew up. You see a lot of like progress and like how far everything has come for them. At the same time, like my son suffered from the same kind of racial bias that I did, right? There are people blaming him for the pandemic and yelling things like I want to join the army.
Wait, now this is in DC area.
This is in a very affluent DC suburb. A child is innocent, right?
Right.
They only hear what they hear around them. So this had to be rhetoric coming from somewhere else.
Yeah.
But it was, I want to join the army so that I can kill all the Asians so that we don't have this happen again. This was said to my son.
Oh my God.
Although it was a huge incident, obviously, but like you think about it, like I'm 47 years later and my son's going through like similar things that were said to me when I was his age, and see the work that we do and understand that it's still like a very important and ongoing challenge.
But for parents who are listening, who are probably facing the same problems as you, what would your advice be?
Yeah, you're right. It's like, it's not a unique story. Again, it's just about like filling their heads with more of your knowledge than the knowledge that they hear from somewhere else, right? It's not that everything's a lesson, but as much as we can, it's like, this is what's right to us, right? And because there's so much noise out in the world. And so the more they hear from you, the better.
This is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this show, right? Because I believe that a lot of hate comes from fear. Fear comes from the unknown. I think there's a lot of need for education and the need not just to share with people who we are and where we come from and what it is, but it's also for people who probably feel like us, who think that they're alone, right?
Right.
That we're not alone. And I think that I'm using food as a way to talk to people about different issues. But one of the misconceptions, I feel that it starts from there. Like when people go talking about Chinese food, what is Chinese food at the moment now in America, in the world, and what truly is Chinese food to you?
Yeah, I have a very strong stance on that sometimes. I agree with you. Like, I always say this, like, food is typically someone else's first introduction into someone else's culture. That's why it's like, you think about most of the cultural Asian centers, Chinatowns, Asia towns, like Vietnam down here. It's always dominated by food, right? And that's how a lot of people just know someone else's culture. So like sometimes people only can speak to me about food, about my culture, because that's all they know sometimes. But it's the gateway drone to introducing other parts of the culture. So Chinese food in America to me is not what probably Chinese food in Asia or China is going to be, right? Like it's two different cuisines to me. Or it's even different from like what I call Chinese food. My parents don't recognize. They're like, that's not Chinese food. That's, whatever, Panda Express, which I love. It's great. Yeah.
Wait a minute. Did an award-winning chef just say he likes Panda Express? Like the fast food version of Chinese food? If that surprised you, there's plenty more where that came from. From redefining Chinese cuisine to tackling fusion food head-on, Chef Tim Ma's insights have been nothing short of an eye-opening journey. Want to hear more? Tune in next time for another delicious deep dive. Till then, terima kasih and thank you for joining us on another culinary journey. Just by tuning in, you're already helping us to keep our stories, our flavors, and our heritage alive. But the reality is, our culture is fast disappearing. And when we lose it, we lose a part of who we are. So if this episode resonated with you, I have just one small favor to ask. Hit that subscribe button and share this show. Talk about it with your friends, your family, or anyone who loves food, culture, and all the stories that bring us together. Let's keep these traditions alive, not just in history, but in our kitchens, our conversations, and our hearts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Hungry Immigrant and my personal account at Abang Brian for behind-the-scene moments and extra bites from each episode. I'm Abang Brian, reminding you to always keep your plates adventurous and your hearts open.